Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp July. She's the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. It's July 10th, 2024. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host. If you have questions or comments for Helga, you can send them to us at questions@schillerinstitute.org, or you can post them on the YouTube chat page. Well, Helga, there's so much going on, I'm not quite sure where to start, but let's begin with a question from a contact in London who writes, I don't know if Biden suffers from dementia, but it's obvious from the NATO summit going on that most of the leaders of NATO are dangerously delusional. Do you think that Putin's patience will last if NATO provides more long-range missiles, F-16s, and approves of Ukrainian strikes inside Russia? I fear we are really looking at a nuclear World War III.
Well, I would be happier if I could dismiss your concern because I do share it. I think that the situation is incredibly dangerous. And, if you analyze the different positions, you come to the conclusion, if you look at it from the side of NATO, there is no option of diplomatic solution, of going back to any kind of negotiations. There is only, the policy of defeating Russia. Now, I think that's completely impossible because you cannot defeat the strongest nuclear power on Earth, especially when they have a nuclear doctrine which says that if their existence as a state is threatened, they will use nuclear weapons. Now that means World War III, and indeed we are very close to that. Now the only consideration, and it's very clear, red lines have been crossed, and Russians have also said that if the F-16s are delivered into Ukraine, then there will have to be some counter reaction, some symmetric or asymmetric response, maybe taking out the F-16s directly, maybe some other way. But given the fact that they are dual-use weapons, or fighter planes, they cannot remain from a standpoint of Russia inside Ukraine. Also, this idea that, what is now being pushed practically by all of NATO, that, all weapon systems can be used deep into the territory of Russia, is a prescription, that sooner or later we will reach a point of no return. And, obviously this is, if you look at it from the Russian side, and you're almost not allowed anymore to do that. But, if you're a scientist, a historian, an analyst, you have to look at all sides and come to a conclusion where we are actually at. And the accusation of NATO, that of basically everybody, Stoltenberg, Biden said it just recently again, and also many others, like the British, are saying it continuously, that the aim of Putin would be to reinstate the Soviet Union, and that therefore, you cannot have a negotiated settlement because, Putin will not stop. He will go on to the Baltic states, to Poland, and even into Western Europe at some point. That is an assumption, that is a statement, but it is not proven by any facts. I have not seen any fact, any proof that that accusation is truthful, but the entire NATO behavior rests on that characterization of what supposedly Putin's intentions are. Now, that is a critical question, and I would ask all of you, our viewers, to insist that this is being clarified, because all I have been able to find were tons of statements by Putin and some others, but Putin is what counts, that, Putin has no intention to reconstitute the Soviet Union. He has no intention to even take over the entire Ukraine, but only those parts which, according to recent developments caused by the Maidan coup, now are regarded as part of the Russian Federation because of votes of the population who are living there. So that's, that is the big gap, and I think we have to absolutely make sure that question is either proven, which I think it is not provable because I have not been able to find any such proof, or it should get out of the equation. And I think the reason why these people who have set up all their hopes on the continuation of the war are so desperate is because if you look at this NATO summit, which was supposed to be the glorious celebration of the 75th anniversary of NATO, if you look at the people who are gathering there, it's a not so illustrious combination. Biden, I don't know what his mental condition is or not. He's weak in any case. Even the Democratic Party has many people who want to have his resignation. The New York Times editorial board is demanding his resignation. So he is not exactly, and they don't really have a credible replacement, is why I think it's taking so long to come to any decision there. But then Macron is completely discredited in France, weak. Scholz, is terrible position. So I think the NATO is not in a strong position at all. And, I think if there would be any reason among these people, they would pick up on the initiative of Prime Minister Orban from Hungary, who has shown the way it is possible to negotiate. And I think just the physical presence of Orban at this NATO meeting must be really a painful experience for these people.
Well, here's a question which is sort of a follow-up on that one about the NATO summit. The person writes, the Warhawk CEO of the Atlantic Council, Frederick Kemps, demonstrated the panic of the NATO delegates in his column yesterday. He writes of the Orban meetings with Zelensky, Putin, and Xi, and Indian Prime Minister Modi's meetings with Putin, as though they are deliberate provocations timed to coincide with the NATO summit. He concludes his article by saying, NATO began its mission 75 years ago amid an inflection point in history, a story former U.S. Secretary of State Dean Acheson chronicled in his memoir, Present at the Creation. Putin and Xi would very much like to be present at the conclusion of NATO and the U.S.-led international order, but they will only be successful if allies don't respond and if their partners go out of their way to back these revisionist autocrats. Do you have any response to the hysteria exhibited by Kemp?
Well, you can only characterize what is going on in such a way if you are sitting on a very, very high horse. And, you're looking down at the whole rest of the world as being, just some dwarfs who don't count. But that arrogance of the so-called Western collective West, that is what is the problem, because it is that arrogance which prevents these people from seeing the world as there is, and they only think that the only way how they can maintain the status of running the world as an unipolar system, is if you treat all of these other countries and peoples as inferior, and that's what comes out of this statement. The reality is that the timing of the visit of Xi Jinping, Putin, and Modi in Moscow has their own logic. I mean, the BRICS are building their own system. They just had the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in Astana. They emphasized, that it's not just the BRICS plus, but it is all of these organizations, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union, ASEAN, some other organizations who are parts of the emergence of a new economic system based on the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, that is sovereignty, non-interference, respect for the different social system of the other country. And these countries are determined to build such a system. And if it timely coincides with NATO, yeah, so be it. But these people do not think that NATO is the navel of the world, and they're doing their own thing. So I think the freak out about Modi going to Moscow, meeting with Putin, is incredible, because India was supposed to be that big, so-called largest democracy, where all efforts were made to put it in the camp of the Western models. But I think they completely underestimated the desire of Modi to have a independent India. So what you will see coming out of the NATO summit, all the signs are speaking in this direction, is an effort to really make NATO a global system. NATO is the North Atlantic defense system, supposedly, but they are deciding now, they decided it since the Madrid summit last year, that NATO should become global. They will make enormous efforts to enlarge the AUKUS, that is the defense alliance between the United States, Great Britain, and Australia, and add Japan and South Korea. And, basically, have this policy of NATO expanding to the east to encircle Russia more and more, to now add to that to encircle China. And I think this is very, very dangerous, because why would NATO, why are they not staying at home? I mean, what business do they have to try to expand to a global system all over the world, trying to contain Russia and China? And I think the fact that these countries of the global south do not agree with that and insist on building their own system is very, it's very rational, it's very understandable, it's legitimate. Nobody has the right to impose their will on the majority of the world population, which is what these countries are, who together represent 85% of the human population. So I think, this has to be resolved. And, the best way to resolve it is, to, go in the direction of sovereignty. The 5 principles of peaceful coexistence are a model, out of which all of international law came. The UN Charter is in cohesion with that. And, I think the idea to have supranational constructs like NATO or the EU for that matter, and they have merit a lot since von der Leyen decided to, basically make the difference between NATO and the EU non-existent. So I think that it's not a provocation. It's arrogance to characterize it as a provocation. And, the fact that they are not holding the ship together is seen by the fact that not only did Modi go to Moscow, but Modi accepted to go immediately after the meeting with Putin to Vienna, to Austria, which naturally means that Chancellor Nehammer is not able to participate in the NATO summit because he has to receive Modi in Austria. So you have Orban from Hungary, Fico from Slovakia. Also, the president of Bulgaria has voiced clear opposition to the NATO policy. You have Kobičice from Georgia, Vučić from Serbia, who is naturally not EU, but part of the European dynamic. And obviously, Austria insisting on its neutral state, all speaks to the fact that there are many forces in Europe also who do not agree to this policy of globalization, militarization of NATO. So I think Mr. Kemps has the wrong view. I think he has to adjust it.
You're listening to Helga Zepp July, the chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. You can send us your questions@schillerinstitute.org. We did get something from the chat line here, Helga, referring to this charge that the Russians deliberately blew up a children's hospital in Kiev. The person writes, numerous photos and videos from Kiev irrefutably confirm destruction by a Ukrainian anti-aircraft missile fired by a launcher positioned inside the city. It seems as though they've used these kinds of false flags before at moments like this, including the Bucha case. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, again, this would require an independent international investigation, which obviously will not happen under the present circumstances. But I think one should also note that some Russian spokesman, it may even have been Ambassador Antonov, but I'm not entirely sure, said that, if a Russian missile would have hit this children's hospital, it would have completely destroyed the building. And just by the nature of the damage, it is very clear that the likelihood is that it was rather from some debris falling down from such a anti-missile attack. So I think it's typical, it's like Bucha too. It's supposed to ruin, like Bucha was, coming onto the scene, especially when the chances for a diplomatic solution around Istanbul was on the table. Now it's the Nato summit, which naturally is designed to fuel the outrage. But I think it's, for most thinking people, it's very apparent.
Now, there was just the second round of the election in France that produced what some people are calling a surprising result. I have an email here from someone who signed their email angry and disappointed. And they ask, what happened to Le Pen's party in the French election? I don't know anyone in France who likes Macron. What happened?
Well, if you look at the election result, the Pen party, the Rassemblement, basically the Pen party is still the strongest party. So Marie Le Pen actually said, that it increased from whatever seats they had to 120. This is a gain of several dozens. In any case, they are the strongest individual party. And, however, naturally, because of this deal between the Macronist and the United Left, the Pop Front, they could prevent that the Le Pen party would get the absolute majority. However, given the fact that the EU already has indicated that they will, force France to adjust their budget because of the deficit they have according to EU rules, they will come down, no matter who the new government is, they will come down with a brutal austerity program. And that means that there is no way how the left components of such a new government, provided that that's what's going to be, will accept that. So this unity is pre-programmed. And I think France is, for everything I can see, looking at a period of, real instability. Macron, according to all reports we are getting from our colleagues in France, is completely finished. So, I think we are in for a turbulent time because such dramatic changes are taking place in almost every country in Europe. And, I think it's a luck that there is an alternative with the global majority organizing themselves in a new economic system. It would be very easy for European nations to reach out to the BRICS, to the SCO, to the Eurasian Economic Union and similar organizations and just say, we want to cooperate on equal terms. We do not insist on decoupling, on de-risking, but, we just will have trade negotiations and relations with each other to the benefit of each. Look at Germany. The recent figures, the newest figures on the German economy for May are devastating. The overall export collapsed by 3.5%, the imports by 6.5%, but the exports to China dropped more than 10.5% or something like that. Now that is a serious blow, and the German economy is in a free fall. And if they continue to be just the vessels of the Anglo-American effort to decouple from China, Germany, and with that all of Europe will go into a free fall even more than now, and that will have incredible social consequences. So I think the good thing is that there is this emerging new system, and the European countries would be well advised to, show the way, like Orban, took the initiative and showed that there is another way. And frankly, if Europe would take such a position towards the global South, that would be the biggest friendship service they could do to the United States and help them to do likewise.
Now, we have lots of questions that have come in on what you might call the mess around Biden in the United States, the question of whether he should step down, whether he should run for re-election, and so on. There are just a couple questions, give you an example. One asks, do you think he should resign? Someone else says, there's obviously been a cover-up by his staffers and by the media. Shouldn't there be some accountability for that? And then someone writes, how can we believe anything? How do we know who's actually running the country? So why don't you take those three questions?
Well, I think that last question points to the crux of the matter, because questions about Biden's fitness were asked 5 years ago by the Democrats already then. There were all these videos in the internet for the last several years. One never would know, are they real? Are they fake? Are they AI doctored? These days one never knows. But it is very clear that the feebleness of Biden does pose the absolute crucial question: who actually is running the United States? Because if it's not the president, and it always was said that the president of the United States is the most challenging job in the world, and indeed, it is a huge job. If it's not run by Biden, who is it? And I think this idea that there is not an elected president, but a permanent bureaucracy, and some names have popped up like this Tom Donilov and similar people. But one could probably, and we are actually looking into this, make a very good list of who is who in this permanent bureaucracy in, Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, the Silicon Valley, the academia, the university control, which is amazingly, if you start looking at these boards of the universities, the overlap with the military-industrial complex, with the banking sector, it's just mind-boggling. So one can actually come up with this permanent bureaucracy of people who have not been elected, who are not accountable, but who are running the show, who are running the fate of the world. And that should really worry anybody, because on the one side, under the name of democracy, human rights, and rules-based order, and all of these nice words, where is the democracy in the United States? So I think it does require, that real patriots of the United States should really basically take on this question and take responsibility for it. At this point, I cannot see who in the Democratic Party would make a difference. Obviously, Trump, there is some, question marks. Is there a connection between Trump and Prime Minister Orban? It seems that there is some coordination on this initiative by Orban to go to Moscow, to go to Beijing and now participate in the NATO meeting, and that all may be a prelude to what Trump has promised, that he could end the Ukraine war in 24 hours. So that is a likely hypothesis. Will the policy towards China be changed if Trump becomes president? That's a big question mark. So, but I think it poses a much more fundamental question, that obviously these institutions of the Wall Street, the military, Silicon Valley, they have taken on a life on their own. And what that does to the Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution, well, that is the big question, which only can be solved by the American people themselves. And, fortunately, we do have two absolutely important flagship campaigns, that of Diane Sare for Senate of New York and of Jose Vega for the Bronx for Congress. And, I can only tell people that orientate towards these campaigns, because they address the issues every American should really be concerned with.
Helga, I have a whole series of questions, so if we can see if we can answer them in a fairly concise way. First, there's from Torah. It is leaked that in the final declaration from the NATO summit that the path for Ukraine into NATO is irreversible. Can you comment on this?
Well, there will be at the NATO summit a big effort to have as strong as possible a wording guaranteeing some kind of a NATO status for Ukraine. But as recent reports indicate, there are also some countries, some members of NATO, who oppose that. And there are actually several people who know that to have made the promise to Ukraine and Georgia, for that matter, at the Bucharest meeting in 2008 was really the most stupid and dangerous decision one could possibly make. And if now NATO would basically give Ukraine some status whereby, if you call it bridge to NATO, or if you call it whatever name you give it, where de facto, more and more NATO is in Ukraine. This is just 1 inch, 1 step, 1 centimeter closer and closer to World War III, because it's just from the Russian standpoint not acceptable from their very basic security standpoint to have offensive weapon systems at their border in Ukraine. That's the whole issue. The NATO expansion, people say, oh, NATO expansion, NATO is such a good-natured creature. Nobody should ever expect anything bad from NATO. That's baloney, because, if you are a military in Russia, you are not listening to words and propaganda. You're looking in hard-nosed fashion what weapon systems have been moved to 5 minutes away from Moscow. And that is what they are reacting to. And anybody who is not dishonest will recognize that it is a legitimate security interest of Russia to make that point. What happened in the Cuban Missile Crisis? Kennedy, when he saw that there were Soviet missiles in Cuba, correctly made the point, this is too close to the United States border. What would be the US reaction if all of a sudden China and Russia would move their offensive systems to the Mexican-American border or to the Canadian-American border? You would have a dance on all media. People would go haywire. So be realistic. If you integrate NATO, and Presidency said it many decades ago. He said, without Ukraine, Russia is not defensible, and it's not even a superpower anymore. Now, people also oppose the fact that with Putin, Russia has started to resume its role as a world player. And they say, under no circumstances, Russia should be allowed to do that. Why not? Russia is the largest country in the world. It has 11 time zones. It's an enormous landmass in Eurasia. It has all the raw materials which are in the Mendeleev table. Why should Russia not say that they are a major power in the world? If you accept that and basically say, let's go back to all disarmament agreements, let's go to, having some peaceful order, it would not be a problem. Now, unfortunately, I don't think that old regime can be re-established, which is why I think the only way how we will get out of this present dangerous situation is by completely changing the parameters, by going back to the principles of the Peace of Westphalia, to say that a continuation of the war will not do any good to anybody, because there will be no victory, no victorious power, because we all will be dead. This was the case in 1648, 44 to 48, when the negotiations took place, because people realized a continuation of the fighting would lead to the death of everybody. And in the times of where we have more than 10 times or probably more the amount of thermonuclear weapons which are needed to eliminate the last bit of life on Earth, to not come to the conclusion that we have to stop is just delusional, to be extremely friendly. So we have to have the idea to go to a new security and development architecture. And fortunately, in the recent period, there have been tremendous steps in this direction. The initiative by Putin from the 14th of June, where he offered all Eurasian security architecture. The same thing was reiterated by Xi Jinping at the 5 Principles of Peaceful Coexistence conference, and now at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization conference. And I think that is what should be discussed. I think that's the only way how we will get out of this crisis.
Now, the other place where there was an election that took place was in the United Kingdom, and Debashis asks the question. He points out that Starmer was quick to condemn Russia, but has not yet condemned genocide by Israel. And he goes on to say, to ask the question, how will the political dynamics change between the UK and the US if Trump wins the US election?
Well, I think this new British government is not any different than the previous one. I mean, maybe in color, maybe Labour instead of the Tories, but in terms of foreign policy, there is no change. I think if Trump would come in, I think that could then lead to a situation where, that would obviously also encourage many more patriotic thinking people in Europe. So I think it would hopefully isolate the British and reduce them to what they actually are, a small island.
And here's the final question for today, Helga, from a German economist who said, I took your advice and read Lyndon LaRouche's fascinating essay on a basket of hard commodities. While I understand his argument about the disaster of the post-1971 floating exchange system, I wonder why he did not make it simple and just go back to the Bretton Woods gold reserve system.
Well, I think, there's too much emphasis on the aspect of the gold reserve and less emphasis on the difference between fixed and floating exchange rates, because that shift, to floating exchange rates is what opened the gates to the whole deregulation of the markets, which, was increased step by step by step until the present almost complete deregulation of everything. But I think the key reason why Lynn's paper is relevant is because the Bretton Woods system was, giving stability to the northern countries, to the Western world. It did allow the reconstruction after the Second World War in Germany and elsewhere. but it did absolutely not fulfill the promise of Roosevelt, which he had given in 1933, that he wanted to create a system which would allow cheap long-term credit for the increase of the wealth of the developing countries. Now, because Roosevelt died at an unfortunate moment, and when Truman became president of the United States, the characterization and the actual, building of the Bretton Woods system took care of the northern countries, but it did not take care of the global south. So they remained in a condition of practically colonialism, poverty, and underdevelopment. And I think the key thing about this paper by Lynn is that it absolutely puts the emphasis on long-term credit for development. And that is, I think, what has to be understood, because we are not talking about a replacement of a monetarist system with another one, but we are talking about the replacement of a monetarist system with a credit system. And, I think there is good hope that what is being negotiated presently between countries such as Russia, China, and other BRICS countries is very much inspired by the ideas of my late husband. And, with other words, that it's not the monetarist value, but the measurement will not even be raw materials and hard commodities, but it will be the increase of the productivity in the production process of the labor power and the industrial capacity, which will be the reference point for the measurement of the currencies. So I think this is a completely different approach. It's oriented towards the ongoing continuous improvement of the life conditions of the people and not the profit of a few. So that's an important difference.
Well, Helga, thanks for joining us again today. It's always a pleasure to hear your thoughts on these things, and I think we're getting more questions coming in still, but you have a second webcast to do. So thanks for joining us, and people should look for the International Peace Coalition meeting tomorrow and find the log for that at the schillerinstitute.com. So anything in conclusion, Helga?
I hate to contradict you, Harley, but it's on Friday. So please check in for Friday.
I made that same mistake on the update today. My
Okay, bye-bye. Until next week or Friday.